Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, the man who I just can't believe gave up this totally sweet Zach McCracken t-shirt,
Tim Longo.
Hey, buddy, how you doing?
Did I give you my Zach McCracken t-shirt?
You did. In fact, I'm wearing it right now.
That's the best. As soon as you said that, I was like, wait a second. I had one of those shirts. Wait, did I give it away?
You did.
Did I give it to Brett?
You did.
That's
you
funny.
Actually gave me two sweet adventure game t-shirts. There was a Secret of Monkey Island one as well, but that one has since bit the dust. I wore it and I spilled something on it, I think.
Those were good shirts. And that Zach McCracken one specifically is quite nice, I recall.
Yeah, that's a very good shirt.
I think it's pretty bright, though, right?
It's it's kind of a bright teal and with orange lettering. It's I don't wear it out of the house, but it's good for recording podcasts.
Fond memories of old Zach McCracken.
Oh, I know. Actually, I'm
player.
not sure. I don't think I played Zach McCracken now that I think about it. No, I definitely didn't. I didn't play Zach McCracken. I think I played all the other ones, but I never played Zach McCracken.
The irony is I think I played that one before I played Maniac Mansion, so my earliest LucasArts adventure game memory was actually Zach McCracken first.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So.
Oh, and there was was Dynamo City a Scum game? We're way ahead. We're getting way deep into the weeds already.
Yeah, I think we can see how this one's going to go.
Anyway, you can probably guess, audience, that we are speaking tonight about video games in the adventure game strain, specifically Day of the Tentacle, which was recently remastered and re-released by Double Fine Productions, under the helm of its original director, or one of its original directors, Tim Schafer. So we are already diving into memory lane with the adventure game series. You've mentioned, Tim, that it was kind of, some of the games that you got your start in. Adventure games are where I got my start entirely, although they were text adventures when I started playing them.
Right.
There were no graphics in those, granted, I was only 1 year old when I started playing those. No, that's not true.
I tried playing all of the, Zork, all of the text adventures back in the day when I started getting into them as well. But they just didn't stick, and it's actually the Sierra games that cracked first for me before the LucasArts games. So King's Quest and Space Quest, and those are the ones that really kind of latched on to me. And then I found LucasArts after that.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I think my very first... I did play a lot of Infocomp games back then, like when they were released on the Apple II, but my original experience was with Crystal Cavern, the original Advent.exe that was on mainframes. My father was at a defense contractor, and we would telephone in, plugging a phone into those foam cups on a 200 baud modem.
You are old.
I am very, very, very old. They don't even have pictures of things like that anymore. They've all disintegrated. And then I turned to adventure games, and I want to say these were actually the first types of games I tried to make as well, text adventures. So, but my first graphical one, since we are talking about a little bit further on, was also, I believe, a Sierra game. It was called, I think, The Wizard and the Princess. This would be an early Apple II title. I hadn't thought about it for talking about it tonight, but I am pretty sure
that was Roberta Williams.
I think that was Roberta Williams. Yeah, very early. It was. Wizard and the Princess. It was the second title released in Online Systems' high-res adventure series after Mystery House. Yeah, I guess it's considered to be part of the King's Quest series. Go figure. I never knew that.
No, I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
That's I actually haven't played that. Yeah.
Yeah, I played that. That was actually, and here we are, further afield. I think that was the first time I ever called a hint line. Sneaking to the phone to call the hint line, because back then those things cost whatever, 50 cents or 25 cents or something like that per call, because there was a section where you had to cross an ocean, and I just could not. I didn't even know where to begin. Like, I was stuck. I just could not progress. And I called and I got directions. It was basically a maze. So yeah, back then you couldn't just go on the internet and look it up when you get stymied by these crazy puzzles. Yeah, so that's my early history with adventure games. I mean, we should probably dive into the fact that we both worked at the company where this was made, albeit a little bit later. You were maybe 3 years after this, I guess?
Yeah, I started right after Full Throttle had shipped. Mm-hmm. Like literally a month ago, they had their wrap party or something like that. So that was sort of still in the air. And Tim had started early workings on Grimm. I recall, yeah. So
yeah, I would say that those two games, Day of the Tentacle and Full Throttle, especially, were the two games that made me cold call Tim Schafer to look for a job at LucasArts, which is how I actually got in the door. I don't know if we've talked about that on the podcast before.
No,
but yeah,
I don't think so, though I've heard the story about 100 times.
Yeah, you certainly have. But yes, I was going to be in the San Francisco area to talk with somebody else about a job, and I'd gotten the advice to look up in a company that you're applying to, to find somebody who has a job that you'd like to have someday. And, even if you're not interviewing with them, at least to get that person out to lunch and pick their brain. And so that's what I did. And Tim set me up with interviews. So when we came back from lunch, I got interviewed by Darren Stinnett, Eric Wilmunder, who did all the scum work.
Yeah.
Oh no, I can't remember his name, but he was the lead programmer on Jedi Knight.
Ray Gresco?
Yes, Ray Gresco.
Yeah.
He especially wanted to interview me because I'd been living in Philadelphia, and he was from there, so he was in the interview as well. I think that's what I remember anyway. And then with Steve Dodderman afterwards, and he was the director of development at that time. So yeah, not long after that, I had an offer to work on what would become Starfighter after a while. So yeah, I always used to tell people, if you're looking for a job in the game industry, cold call Tim Schafer. But I'm not allowed to say that anymore because of the lawsuit. So.
Yeah, well, it's on air now, so good luck with that.
He always says, "Send a demo." That is his response as soon as he ever sees me talking about this anymore. Send a demo. So yes, do not cold call Tim Schafer anymore. It doesn't work. But do send a demo. It's a lot easier to do that today. But yeah, those two games, the humor in these games as well as the craft, were really what drew me to this company specifically. Although I never worked on an adventure game that shipped anyway while I was there. So, that kind of, I don't know, it's maybe putting the cart before the horse, but it kind of takes me thinking about the sort of so-called rumored and often over-reported death of the adventure game. Yeah.
And there was, I mean, when would you say that started? I feel like, and I think some of this it hits close to home because we were there, but I remember, while Grimm was being developed and shipped, and then a few other things, it seems like, after that, from some other companies, there was Monkey 4, Monkey 3 before that. And,
right. Monkey 3. Yeah. Monkey 3 is when I think I started to hear those sorts of things. And of course, Grimm was well underway by then. So yeah, Curse of Monkey Island finished right after I started at the company, and actually had as a project lead, as two project leads, rather. They shared it, Jonathan Ackley and Larry Ahern, both of whom are in the credits for this game. They were the project directors, and Jonathan was from programming, and Larry was the lead animator, I believe, on Day of the Tentacle. And they were just finishing up this game, Curse of Monkey Island, when I got there, if not immediately before I got there. I feel like it was right after, but I could be wrong. But yeah, I think I started even hearing it then, and especially with Grimm, which I think sold better than people realized, but still did not sell gangbusters. It wasn't a huge hit. It made money, but not a lot of money.
One thing that just dawned on me that maybe is obvious and to the audience, and I guess I'd never thought about, but Grimm, because of the pre-rendered backgrounds, I'm trying to think of the trend of that particular scenario, because Full Throttle had 2D backgrounds, but then
Full Throttle was essentially still a scum game.
Yeah, right. But then I guess my point is, having just finished Final Fantasy IX on the last series, was it that genre or those sorts of genres that started to merge? Because essentially, you think about lockboxes and 3D pre-rendered backgrounds with or 2D, pre-rendered 3D backgrounds made into 2D with lockboxes, and then the actual, interactable, elements, characters, objects, etc., being three-dimensional, low poly. That was what we just finished playing in
right.
Final Fantasy IX, and those are around the same time. So which influenced which in that regard? I'm trying to think of other genres that would dabble in the two of those two different mediums being merged together, other than Final Fantasy type games.
Well, I think you were also seeing it in things like Resident Evil.
Yeah, Resident Evil is a good example. Yeah.
Which is, and other survival horror games, but especially that one because it was kind of a breakout for the genre.
Resident Evil being a hybrid action adventure, kind of thing with puzzles and stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that, I think what really started the talk about the death of the adventure game was not so much anything that was going on at LucasArts, although, falling fortunes of, how much they were making, because Full Throttle itself was actually a quite large hit. But I think the big thing was that Sierra basically died. It was still around, but mostly as a brand after that. I don't think they released another adventure game. I can't remember if they released another adventure game while I was even in games. I think they got bought around the time that I joined the industry, and then I don't think they ever published another adventure game. And I think that was kind of the biggest deal. And part of that was also, I think, the industry had tried to take adventure games in kind of a different direction. You had Myst, which was kind of taking it away from the sort of dialogue-heavy, kind of brainy puzzles that it had been before. And it was still puzzles, but they were kind of, in a way, more abstract, right? They weren't really located in a story so much as an environment. So that was one direction. And you also had other CD-ROM games, like Seventh Guest.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Or Phantasmagoria. Which was another Sierra game, and the Gabriel Knight stuff, right? I think they were trying to take it kind of in a different direction, and I think that was too expensive, to be honest.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, and I definitely wasn't necessarily picking on Grimm, but I do remember, when it comes to production cost, and I think that, the games did well, but as with many genres, we can probably pick out this trend in a few different other places across sort of the history of certain genres. When something hits its peak, right, people double down in those genres and try to kind of expand upon them and make them more elaborate and more exciting. And I think Phantasmagoria actually is a really good example, because I remember, having been a Sierra fan, remember kind of following that one as it was coming out, in the kind of the hybrid FMV that they were doing. And, they were kind of boasting that it was going to be this ultimate kind of cinematic adventure game, all put into one, really high quality. And it ended up falling pretty flat, as I recall. It definitely did as I was playing it.
Yes, I think the big thing, too, is that it was a very early game meant for very mature audiences. This wasn't something that you were going to give to your 12-year-old to play, because it was extremely gory.
Yeah, that one specifically for sure, yeah.
I think other games, certainly a game like Day of the Tentacle was something that I could have played when I was 10 or whatever, although I was older when it came out. But I could have played it.
Yeah. Well, and that was a staple of LucasArts
right.
games. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think a lot of the earlier Sierra games were that way as well. Certainly anything in the King's Quest or Space Quest series. Maybe the Police Quest was a little darker, but still not violent.
They had Leisure Suit Larry. They had the Manhunter games.
That's true. Leisure Suit Larry's a great choice. And Manhunter, too. Yeah, sure. I recall that.
Super weird games. In fact, I have some weird memories of the Manhunter series that I actually should go back to and revisit those games. It's been, I think one of the themes that it sounded like you and I wanted to talk about in this whole thing that we'll get to later is just for me specifically, the nostalgia factor of playing one of these older adventure games and kind of how putting myself back in this time frame and thinking about everything that I was playing around this era is really interesting. But anyway, yeah.
I didn't do my homework as far as that goes. But what do you remember being out in like 1993? It's a little early for Diablo, not super early though. Maybe it was a few years later.
Yeah, well, I remember Day of the Tentacle coming out and feeling like
Doom.
Yeah, so that's what I was about to say. I remember feeling like these games were starting to lose their luster on me because things like Doom was coming out. Not too long after that, Dark Forces came out, which was, I think, an even bigger influence on me than Doom. Right. And 3D engines started coming out, right? You did have the Resident Evils. You had the bigger, RPGs were getting more epic, and they would have, dialogue embedded within them. When was Ultima Underworld? We were talking about this before. That must have been 95, 94?
It might have been 94.
So
I'm going to look that up while we talk.
When those sorts of games were coming out, I think my mind just started going. As much as I loved the adventure games, at the time,
it was in fact 92. It was the year before.
Yeah, see, and I had played that when it came out, and so I think jumping into Day of the Tentacle, even though I finished it at the time, but I don't think I actually, truthfully, have played Day of the Tentacle since then because I don't remember anything. And I kind of remember moving on. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I think a lot of people were going through that. And as we'll probably bounce around a bunch here, one of the things that is really reminding me a lot about the genre at the time, really great writing, great fun story. Animation was awesome. Art style was awesome. But, the puzzles and the gameplay and the sort of usability of it, just not there. And I feel like...
we'll get there for sure.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. But I think that those sorts of reasons, I think, were starting to, push me into other things that gave me more clarity and ownership over my experience.
Right. And I actually think the Sierra games were far worse from that standpoint.
Oh, completely. Yeah, I wouldn't defend them.
If you go back to look at, some of those King's Quest games around this time, they're lunacy. I was reading,
and I did in sentences. Yeah.
Yes. It was, and you were, trying to trap a unicorn in real time in an engine that's really not built for anything that's real time, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. There was, I'll have to find the link for the show notes, but I not too long ago stumbled across somebody who was replaying all the King's Quest games. Last year, I believe, I stumbled upon that, and it was, it was insane. It was insane to read these things that you were doing in these games and having totally forgotten, how crazy and difficult that they were, and I think that's really a late phase of a genre problem, right? You have what we call grognard capture, which is a wargaming term. Do you know that one? Have you heard that before?
No, I've heard it. Couldn't define it though.
Right. So grognard capture, grognards are like, they're hardcore, tabletop wargaming, like with miniatures and all that stuff, nerds. And they're the ones who come out, religiously and buy every game, but they always want them to be harder. They always want them to be more intricate. They always want them, to have more dice rolling or more tables or more whatever, more simulation elements, for example. And what happened in tabletop wargaming was that market was captured by that niche of the really hardcore, because you had to get them in order to have any chance at all to make money on your title. So I think the same thing happens in sort of late genres often, where it's just like, well, your puzzles have to be so clever in an adventure game. Your dialogue has to be so witty. You have to have X many in-jokes, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm. The formula.
Exactly. But you have to go. It's sort of here we are in electoral season, so it's sort of like the early part of the electoral cycle where you have to run to the base.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to capture the base first to have a chance at actually making your money. At least that was the theory at the time. I don't think that that's true anymore, and in fact, I think that's a lot of why adventure games have seen sort of a resurgence in the last few years, because I don't think that they try for that capture anymore. There still are some who do, but I think that the breakout sort of adventure game successes have kind of stepped away from trying to be what it was.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool thing about the evolution of the genre, because it hit its peak in those early 90s, right? And LucasArts and Sierra, they were kind of top of their game, right? And everyone was chasing them the way that everyone ended up chasing, whomever else we talk about, whether it be id or whether it be, MMOs or what have you. And they hit their peak, and then something new, various things started happening, and then it's sort of like, and I, maybe vaguely remember some of these conversations around the halls of LucasArts. They were sort of like, okay, what is our new flashy thing that we're going to do to this genre to keep it relevant with the dooms of the world that are coming out and changing people's perceptions? And I think, maybe someday we'll get into this. I don't know if we'll ever play an Ultima game, but Ultima is an interesting, I think, case study in the evolution of a franchise over a long, long, long period of time. I recently met somebody who worked on Ultima 9, and thinking about, and thinking about,
tough one to develop, to be honest. Well, I mean, I feel the oof on both sides on that one.
Yeah, exactly. But just kind of the sense of something that tried to evolve, over time and keep up with the times, and how challenging that would be. And then for adventure games, kind of hitting that apex and then tanking, right? Like things just essentially going dark. And then Brett and I were talking about offline before we started, this kind of narrative of in the industry of that, are adventure games dead for 5 to 8 to maybe more years, before things started popping back up again. So it's an intriguing little mini case study there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing that came up again and again and again. And Sean Clark, who was one of the project leads on The Dig, I think, I think that was with Mike Stemley. Mm-hmm. I think they did that together.
And Monkey 4.
And Monkey 4, that's right. Yeah. Both of them did that one as well. So that was Escape from Monkey Island, I guess. His comment was always, it's not that adventure games are dead, it's that they're evolving, and nobody has really figured out where they're evolving to. And so there was really a lot of experimentation at the time to try to figure that out. And that was something. I mean, he was passionate about them up until the end, really.
Yeah, I forgot you had actually quoted him before with that, and I forgot he said that. And it's a really insightful comment, because the truth of the matter is, and as we're playing this game again, it's reminding me of some sort of core, not to overuse the word, but core paradigms that a lot of games owe to adventure games that we don't really give a lot of credit to, the kind of cause and effect of things, and kind of the exploration and discovery that you have now in aspects of dialogue trees and puzzles within other genres. Even open world games, can have stuff like this. That really, the adventure games was a simpler, more distilled down design of a specific few verbs. I mean, yes, they had various verbs within what you could interact with, open, close, blah, blah, blah. But as far as like the depth of the game, there wasn't much to it, right? It was just kind of figuring out the flow chart of it all. But those notions were shared then with other genres, and the blending started.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you say the exploration, the other thing, of course, would be inventory, which probably didn't start with adventure games, but, well, they may have. There's certainly inventory in adventure, and that's about as early as you get.
Yeah.
I was thinking, you actually still have aspects of, what adventure games did so well was making you sort of think through the logic of that world and sort of, what if I did this with that? And that's kind of how you find your way through the game. And of course that's everywhere. I mean, that's in creativity games like Minecraft to a certain degree.
Recipes,
I wonder if I put together, wood with steel or iron or whatever, the sort of ingredients, what would I get when I'm crafting something in Minecraft? Of course, these days you can just go look all that stuff up. But that sort of exploratory and also kind of getting into the head of the designer, like how does his brain tick? Like how does he think? And and that's a hard thing to do when it's Tim Schafer or Dave Grossman.
Yeah, I mean, I had written down another note that was completely what you just said there. Just this concept that adventure games sort of were they were set up in such a way, whether it was intentional or not, to be the player against the designer. And to your point about like recipes and mixture and experimentation and discovery and exploration in games, I think a lot more games these days, and the ones that I tend to gravitate to more myself, it's the player against the simulation or the player against the systems instead, right? Where the rules are set up and the rules, maybe they can be opaque, but often they try to be pretty clear. And then it's, can I do this with this? But it's more of the simulation rather than the designer trying to tell you what to do with it. Kind of a big difference, but that fundamental concept was there in adventure games. You just had to learn what the rules were. And in games, wacky games like this, that was really hard to do.
Yeah, it was. Although, I have to say, this one I find a lot less opaque that way. Like I find Secret of Monkey Island, which is another one we could have played, right? I mean, that was remastered just, like 3 or 4 years ago by LucasArts themselves. I find those a lot, something about, like, I guess I can't get as into Ron Gilbert's brain as I can get into Tim Schafer's brain. I don't know why that is, but I find the puzzles in the Monkey Island games actually a lot less clear to me. This one I constantly, and I'm not, like, as I was saying to you in email, I'm not entirely sure I finished this one. I know I finished Sam Max. I've definitely played Full Throttle multiple times. I've certainly finished Grimm. The latter two Monkey Islands I definitely finished. But I'm not sure I finished this, the second Monkey Island, Secret of Monkey Island 2 or Secret of Monkey Island. Or this one. I'm not entirely certain, to be honest. I'm not remembering. I'm playing it, and I'm not remembering a lot. So I feel like I may not have gotten as far, even as we've gotten tonight. So, yeah, I can't completely remember. I'm almost positive I finished this one, but it's all. I mean, if I had, it was when it had come out, and I don't remember anything. Some vague memories of things. That's a long time ago. Half a lifetime ago.
I remember being just as irritated by Hoagie's voice line. I don't wanna. That he says. I don't wanna. He's fucking. Oh man,
it's all the time too.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that right now.
I'm just as irritated now as I was then.
Yep. Yeah, he can be very frustrating. I'll get to those. I'll get to stuff about Hoagie's voice because I went and looked up all the voice actors and stuff like that. We can talk about that later. But anyway, we should probably turn to sort of what's going on today, which is the eventual resurgence of adventure games. I mean, they're obviously doing well enough to be able to remake them for a modern audience, or to remaster them, I guess is what they use as the term. This has had a remaster, of course. Grimm had a remaster last year, which I also played quite a bit of, although I don't think I finished it this time out. It would have been my third time through. I don't know that I did. Yeah, Grimm is pretty long. We thought about that one for the cast too, but we just played a long game.
I wanted to take a break. Yeah.
It's definitely a good idea to take a little break this time out.
I'm still having nightmares.
Yeah, it's pretty long game. And then the Monkey Island had one. 4 years ago, say 4 or 5 years ago.
It was long. I think it was longer than that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a little while ago. So I mean, it's been worth people going back to take a look at the ones that were made back then. But the adventure games never really died all the way. People ported Scum to all kinds of different devices, so you could play the old ones or play new ones using that engine. It went to kids for a while. Gilbert kept it alive down at Humongous for years.
Yeah, those are great, actually. I love those.
They're terrific. Yeah, Pajama Sam and
there's a bear, I think.
The car, Putt Putt.
That's right. Yeah.
And then Spy Fox was for the kind of oldest generation of kids. I went and looked for my copies of a number of those games, and I don't know what happened. I had the boxes, but not the discs. I was like, oh, this is not good. I was trying to pass them along to a friend who has a young child. I was like, oh, she'll totally love this stuff. So, it was kind of kept alive for a while, and that was even with the Scum engine, I believe. And then they did kind of disappear for a while, at least in this form. But they've come back even in this form with games like Wajidai's games. They did one about Emerald City Confidential, I want to say. They've done that Blackwell series, which I think, they did a whole bunch of them. So I think they must have been reasonably, they must have paid for their own development, certainly. So those old, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, there's been a slew of them. Like, I don't even know if I could name them all. I definitely haven't played them all, but as far as like point and clicks, it's really big in the indie side of things right now, maybe for obvious reasons, because of the production side of it is a little more manageable, maybe. But there was that one that's a lady's name that just came out like a couple weeks ago that's getting a lot of good press. Shoot, I'll have to look it up. I don't want to.
Yeah, you have to. I don't know that I heard of that one.
Click through.
But and then of course it has been trying to evolve. There was a Sam & Max game in development at LucasArts when it rebooted when I left in end of 2004, which I guess was called Sam & Max Freelance Police, I think was the name of it. And that was Kevin Bruner was on that, and he went and became the CTO over at Telltale. And Dan Connors, who had been in test for a long time, and I think had moved up to production. Yeah, maybe. I think he was producer.
Yeah, he was producer on Obi-Wan and a few other things. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
he was my old boss. Yeah, when I joined QA.
Right. So those two guys went off and founded Telltale, which has really, had a real good run with a lot of titles people have quite enjoyed. And their modus operandi has been mostly to find good licenses to pair with adventure games. So stuff that has strong narrative worlds that they can try, they can try to make something out of. And the most famous of these, of course, is The Walking Dead, which was a Game of the Year type title, a few years ago when it originally came out. So, it's not a genre that ever did die. It did, it always had its fans, and so it's still relevant as a genre today, even if it's not entirely in the same format. I mean, certainly Telltale games are not as puzzle heavy, at least since Walking Dead. So maybe some of the earlier ones were. I know they did a Wallace and Gromit series that was pretty different. I mean, their innovation was more about the business model first with the episodic than it was the actual format of the games. And then with The Walking Dead, they've kind of gotten away from the format, the strict kind of puzzle-focused format, puzzle and dialogue, to be even more dialogue and almost no puzzle with those games, and be all about kind of your emotional response to the story with the little bit of control you have over it. So it's still a strong, viable, genre.
And I think, to your point about it kind of never dying, I think just the theory of it kind of living dormant in other genres for a while, until it can kind of have a rebirth. Because I remember actually talking to Dan here and there over the years before he and Kevin and others started Telltale up, and kind of this concept that it had gotten maybe more complicated than it needed to be, but that there's the underpinnings of it still made a lot of sense to people, and people just somebody wanted to try to find a way to crack that nut again, but do it in the right manageable way, and that was their kind of their vision for Telltale. And then once those other genres that were kind of taking some of that discovery and kind of that cause and effect and dialogue and owning it for a while, it allowed, I think, adventure games to become more, user friendly. Because again, coming back to what we're playing now with Day of the Tentacle, you could see, and if there are any audience members out there that are playing along with us, I'd be interested to hear, through email or what have you, send us some of your experiences if you hadn't played this game when it had originally come out. So you're only playing the remastered, because I kind of want to know what people think, fresh eyes think of this game, because there are some fundamentals when it comes to user facing features and the way that the game treats the user that we've gotten over. And I think other genres have taught us how to get over them. And then I think Telltale and Double Fine and others have now adopted those kind of modern conventions to make adventure games better. And, it's just hard to play as much as it's such a charming game. It's hard to play it right now because it's, there's all these frustrating things that they weren't even, no, it's not their fault. They weren't thinking of it. They didn't have, the whatever 20 years of gaming between now and then to benefit from.
Right. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It and you can see why it's something that would appeal to an audience, especially in early days of PC gaming where the machines weren't powerful, real time, sort of Twitch gaming was not really super possible. You could have kind of arcade experiences, but nothing like, a third-person action-adventure game like you could play today, like, an Uncharted or Tomb Raider or whatever. So you couldn't possibly do something like that. So you had kind of arcade stuff and, things that were a lot more abstract. And then this was sort of a visually rich world with a strong story, which, just seems to appeal to a wider audience. And I think the most successful of them even had an element of wish fulfillment. Ben Throttle is a cool guy.
Oh,
right?
I was just going to say that. Yeah, keep going. I want to follow up. Go.
Yeah. I mean, you've got in its very best, and even comically goofy Guy Threepwood. He's a pirate. That's still a cool, a fantasy sort of figure. These games, this and the original Maniac Mansion, are kind of the furthest afield from a wish fulfillment standpoint, because they are about basically nerdy and strange kids. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I was just going to make the point about, again, we were talking about what else was coming out around this time. When I can go from a fantasy and wish fulfillment perspective, go and play these other games that are coming out, that especially in a 3D, I'm more fully in control of my character way. I can see playing this game now why. Probably I'll speak for myself, but I would guess why other people started dropping off as well is like this. It wasn't keeping me. You know what I mean? There were these other fantasy fulfillment games out there that were really, that kind of, power fantasy or wish fulfillment, like you were talking about, that I could gravitate to instead of, because these were kind of punishing and not always fair. It's like, why would I spend my time doing this stuff? The writing and the story definitely keeps me going. And the charm that's there. And then, as you were saying, the wish fulfillment point, I remember this probably was maybe 98 or so. No, it must have been 2000. I remember Tim doing a talk at GDC about wish fulfillment and the whole core of his thing. And when you think about even Grimm, I'd say, which is a interesting fantasy fulfillment notion, right? Some completely creative and completely awesome in all of the ways that it should be, but it's not one of those things that people think about wanting to do, right? Going to the land of the dead and being one of the reapers. Interesting. Full Throttle, as you said, and I think Pirates, those hit it on the head, right? Like being a biker, right. Being a pirate, those are closer.
Well, and I think Grimm tried to. It's just that the thing that really stuck out when you saw Grimm wasn't the film noir stuff, which I think was a wish fulfillment, kind of a Sam Spade.
That's true, yeah.
I think that was, for some people, a possible way in. I just think that it was so much more talked about, and especially in sort of the enthusiast press, it was so much more focused on this wacky setting that hadn't been seen before. Yeah. And so that was, I think, where the enthusiast press really hooked in, and that meant they kind of left behind the thing that might have actually drawn in more customers.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
I got stuck on that too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I told Darren when I was hired, I'm sorry, but whenever Grimm comes out, I'm just going to be playing that probably at work, so you know. And yeah,
that was built into your contract.
That was built in. He actually let me. All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come talk about sort of the beginning of the game and maybe get into some discussions of how this thing holds up after all this time. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. Hello again. We're back from the break. I want to go straight into the beginning of the game, and the first thing that caught my eye was the gold guy.
Yeah, that's right. Good point. Good point.
I love the gold guy. So the gold guy was the LucasArts logo. I often thought of him as the eye guy as well, but I know we called him the gold guy because he sort of looks like he's got an eye, in his hands. It's more of a rainbow or something. I don't know what it's supposed to be.
I think it's supposed to be an eye. It is
supposed to be an eye.
Yeah,
okay,
it's a double meaning picture.
Right. The thing that I remember most about this,
an eye, right?
Right. Okay, yeah. The thing I remember about those, and it's actually a tradition that Double Fine has continued, is that every game had to do one. Yeah. A different gold guy. I don't know how far that goes back. It might be the whole history of the company, but I haven't played some of the early games, so I couldn't even tell you. But I do love, I love those games, from the time that we were there, and how you would always show. We would do these internal, sort of presentations of the games every now and again to the whole company, and you would always show your gold guy. Yeah. That was like the first thing you would show.
Everyone was excited about that, yeah, and everyone wanted to kind of do something creative with it, or fun or goofy, and I remember the Grimm one being really good, and
the Grimm one was probably my favorite of the whole time.
Yeah,
I like that one a lot. I like the Starfighter ones. The Jedi Starfighter, he has a lightsaber and is reflecting back, bolts from from the Jedi Starfighter itself, and
I'm sure there's some great supercuts out there.
There are. Yeah, when the company finally died for good, somebody linked those on. They're definitely out there with YouTube with just every one of them. And there are a lot, and they're fun. And I like that he has continued to do that at Double Fine. He always has the two-headed baby. And the two-headed baby, might be like Rockstar Roadies, in Brutal Legend, or, and I don't remember what the thing was with Psychonauts, but in this one, of course, it's a three-headed baby, and it's got the three heroes. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's so fun to see that tradition continue on, because I don't know that any other company ever did something like that.
Occasionally people try, like, I remember EA was trying to do it for a little while with their, partner games and stuff. The logo would come up for Dead Space versus something else, and they would have a stylized to it, but nobody commits to it like I feel like LucasArts do.
Yeah. And I want to say these are probably some of my favorite opening credits in games ever.
Really stylized, really nice. Yeah, well done. Pixar feeling,
Yeah, exactly. It captures so much of kind of the feel and flavor of the game, and kind of, we're going to go on this kind of crazy adventure together. There's some great commentary in the commentary track, which we're not both listening to because we don't have time to play both with it and without it, and I'd rather focus on playing without it. But there are some great things in that about anecdotes about the development of the game that, for people who are really interested in going deep on stuff like that, totally recommend it. So these credits were, among my favorite sort of cinematic opening credits ever, and I think maybe Metal Gear Solid would be another strong contender. Going into that base, through the submarine entrance or whatever. I don't kind of look back and have a lot of opening credit scenes that I remember. And this might have been, I don't know if we did a lot at LucasArts where we had, team names in the opening of the game after this. This might have been among the last ones where they actually had who did all the work kind of in an opening credit sequence. I think we were trying to get away from that.
Like a film kind of feel, yeah.
Right. Anyway, it was also fun seeing so many names, people that we knew, certainly, Dave Grossman and Tim Schafer, but also Larry Ahern, Jonathan Ackley, I mentioned, but also Wayne Klein and Dan Connors were down in QA. And
yeah, that's right.
I don't know if you knew Wayne.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. You would have in QAs.
He worked on Indie. He was our producer on Indie. I know.
He was on Indie. Okay, yeah. And he was the first producer on Starfighter.
That's right.
But he left the company. He and I actually came up with the original story for Starfighter together. So, and we got no credit. No credit.
Oh, I took you out. That was intentional.
Yeah, I'm sure it was Hayden muscling in. But yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that I think about a lot, just looking at this game as it starts up, is one of the real strengths of this genre, and this kind of, there weren't too many games after this that did this at LucasArts, and by the time I got there was only Curse of Monkey Island, but it built so much on the existing technology. They were, every game was kind of refining and improving Scum, but it was basically tools that they knew how to use. Mm-hmm. And I think that was, we talked about that a little bit the last couple episodes with Final Fantasy IX about how they were, at the end of a life cycle, they had these mature tools and they were able to make this really wild, game that really kind of pushed a lot, the envelope in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing was happening, in Scum games, even at this point, in its evolution, so I don't know what would have come after this. I guess the Dig was probably after this.
And you said Full Throttle was in Scum too, right?
Yes, it's in Scum, but it also has
a couple 3D.
It has iMuse, and it has the video system that Vince. What was Vince's last name? Lee? Vince Lee?
Yeah.
He wrote that streaming system for.
Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue.
For Rebel Assault.
Because Mortimer used it as well.
That's right, yeah.
Oh, come to me. Yeah, Rebel Assault was the first big thing that
right.
Shipped that.
I mean, I think to a certain degree that was another thing that hampered the, we talked a little bit in the first section about how Grimm kind of was expensive and long-running development, and a lot of that had to do with the company had decided that they were going to be 3D only from now on. Only 3D accelerated games, and I sort of feel like that was a mistake. I think it made a big PR kind of splash. It was but it also had a lot of backlash from adventure gamers who were like, why would you do that? You make these great games that are 2D, you don't have to be 3D to be good. And that was, I think, another trend that, just from an expense point of view, because it was, as we'll talk about, kind of getting to that point where it was a niche and people who played it, expected certain things and increasing difficulty, that I think if they had laid off on a little bit, Myst came out the same year, and Myst sold wildly more than.
Oh man, yeah.
I mean, there were a lot of reasons for that had nothing to do with the game itself, such as it being bundled with a lot of CD-ROM PCs at the time, for example, because that was a new technology. And in fact, this game, was having a voice track at all was a response to that. This was the first talkie.
Yeah.
Although they went back and added it to Monkey Island 2, this was the first one, and I actually have one of those triangle boxes down in my basement as well. So it was an interesting time. I mean, there's a lot of changes going on right around now.
Well, I think that it reflects the industry at the time too, right? Because I think 3D and acceleration specifically, you have Tomb Raider. One that came out, and we talked about Doom already, and I think everyone, for a company that was generally built around one specific, generally one genre of adventure games. At
least at this time, yeah.
That's what I mean, and X-Wing was out, right, and TIE Fighter and stuff like that. So, but that was made with Larry and Totally Games and stuff. And
right, X-Wing I think was this year, so TIE Fighter might have been the year following. And those were done out of house by Larry Hall.
But I mean, just the kind of the especially around the time of Grimm, that kind of the identity crisis. And I remember because I actually had only worked on 3D games there, right? So
right.
The transition had already started, and I came up. I was a gamer during this phase.
But before this at LucasArts, there were more variety games, and there were more technically challenging games. Fractalus. The rendering for that game, whatever the game was like, doing that fractal-based rendering for the terrain was a real step forward at the time. And they had also done that early, I won't say MMO, but, at least multiplayer game, Habitat, which would have been in the mid-'80s.
Sure, yeah.
So there's, it was a company that did a lot of different stuff early on. And I think that was while it was trying to figure out what they were going to do. and famously, they weren't really allowed to do Star Wars games.
Yeah.
So they were meant to succeed or fail on their own without the benefit of the license. So that was also a big deal as well. It's just really interesting getting to adventure games. But anyway,
one of the things I remember about the opening of this game that kind of did definitely come rushing back to me when we started was, and I don't know if this is accurate or not because Monkey 2 and Loom a little bit, and I don't know if Sam & Max was after this or before this. It was
after, but the same year.
Yeah, and so this move to. And I'm playing the remastered version, right? So it's cleaned up, and I haven't gone back to look at the original version. I'm going to try bouncing back and forth, but I remember the stylization and I don't know the composition of things and the exaggeration of things felt more like a Saturday morning cartoon than it had in the past, right? Occasional cutscenes in the previous games, like Monkey 1 and stuff, had some of that going on, but this kind of fully embraced the stylization, definitely from Maniac Mansion 1 and Zach McCracken era stuff. And I just remember watching, I feel like I remember playing DOT back in the day and thinking, wow, really feels like a cartoon, and they had consciously, they'd chosen to do that with this.
And that's actually something Peter Chan does address in the commentary, because I have occasionally turned it on. He actually talks about using something more like a cutout collage method to do the backgrounds, because you've seen Peter's concept work certainly, and I used to go and stare at it on the big Grimm wall of concept. This huge wall outside of Tim's office with tons and tons of concept art, and I would go and look at that, and there was so much detail. And what he lamented, and I guess what he learned a lot prior to this game, probably on Maniac Mansion, was how little of that detail was going to be able to come through, on 64K Commodores, And so he switched up his method and went more towards these kind of weird shapes. So instead of getting detail and character from literal detail, he did it by going with, unusual shapes. So the mansion feels like something's kind of crumbling, or just kind of put together weird, like
exaggerated too.
Yeah, and exaggerated, and big triangles and doors that kind of canter and have sagging thresholds and things like that. So there's a lot that he did, I think, in just changing up how he looked at it. Of course, now we'd be able to perfectly represent whatever vision he had for a 2D background. But at the time, that was definitely not the case.
Well, and to the point where I think the sort of stylization and exaggeration and in times almost abstract shapes, especially when you get to some of the future stuff with Laverne, that I remember anecdotally here and there people referencing Day of the Tentacle as a style. It's like, oh yeah, it's kind of like Day of the Tentacle meets blah blah blah, right. because it was so cool in its own way. And I think, though the earlier games like Monkey or what have you, they were cartoony and stylized, but it was kind of a little more traditional, and maybe, I don't know, a little more Disney-ish or something like that. While Day of the Tentacle always felt to me like it had its own thing going on, which I always appreciated.
Touching on the sort of future style, where Laverne is, what I love about that is everything is triangles. Uh-huh. So it's shaped like the tentacles.
Oh, I didn't notice that. That's a great point. Yeah.
So it's meant to,
the
like,
doors are triangles. And,
yeah, exactly. So if you think about, even the fireplace is a triangle. If you think about, about doors and windows and art, they're all rectangles and things like that. But we are basically rectangles, right? I mean, we're basically the same width across at the, at the shoulders as we are at the feet if we're standing in a normal position. Yeah. And we're much taller than we are wide, most of us.
I didn't even catch that. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the motivation there. But
Yep.
Anyway, let's get right into adventure gaming. Because we sort of talked about the opening cutscene. I will say what I really liked about the very first puzzle, if you can even call it that, is that there's basically nothing you can do. So you're stuck in basically two screens, I guess. You can go into the office, and there's some stuff you can pick up in there. And it is kind of teaching you, even though at this point they probably figured their audience knew what to do, they are still teaching you how to explore space by constraining that space. So you stumble across the grandfather clock fairly quickly because there's not a lot of interactable objects. You can get a dime in the phone. You can pick up a couple things in the office. You can look at stuff, but there's only really those two screens to deal with. And so you're going to find your way into the basement lab very quickly, and then kind of have another long cutscene, to sort of get you right into it, to remind you, like, this is the sort of thing, or to teach you this is the sort of thing you're going to have to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to ask them how much of that early tutorialization or control of the player's flow to kind of teach them what's going on, and because I agree with you, I think the audience was so known and so specific at this point. I'm betting that they wouldn't go through a process that we would today, where we're thinking about new players and new, or maybe even the way that something like a Broken Age would be, or the Telltale games. Having just played the first episode of the Minecraft story mode with my daughter literally yesterday, and there's some modern tutorialization, like light touch tutorialization in that game to kind of just teach you what a Telltale game's all about.
Well, I mean, it does. I mean, I feel like this game does kind of. Well, there's a couple things. One is, if you do toggle back, I do occasionally toggle to the original look, just to remind myself. And often I'm just curious, like, how did this look before? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of it right now looks like you're like, oh yeah, it's totally how I remember it. But of course, your brain filled in an awful lot of gaps because it looked a lot different in, I don't know, 320, 240 probably. And maybe 64 colors, maybe 16, probably 64. But anyway, a palette, not a lot of colors. So there's that, and actually they've held to that pretty well. But I do feel like it is structured in such a way to do that kind of expansion. the two things I want to comment on. One is that in the remastered version, the verbs aren't visible on the screen. And they were in the old Scum games. You sort of rendered the game in a window, like the Ultima games, but not as small. It was a large portion of the screen, maybe 2/3. And then at the bottom, you could see your inventory and the verbs.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so you always knew what was available when you moused over something. Here you know that because you're gonna click on it and get that, but you sort of just looking at the game knew these were the sorts of things I could do. It is, and some of them are weird. Like, it is weird that there is open, close, and use that you can use on a door.
Yeah.
And open opens, close closes, and that's irritating because, like, you accidentally hit close on a closed door, et cetera. And then use toggles, it takes it from whatever it is to the other one.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my God, that is so much waste. Like, why? You don't need that much.
Well, and you could see the progression of that later on, right? Because they started to collapse that stuff down and simplify it in Full Throttle and Graham.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely.
They would add maybe more, but those particular crossover ones, they would just, yeah. And what I meant more was I just would be interested to hear maybe that first couple rooms they focus you some, so they're gonna put you where they want to put you. I felt like playing this time that it was more for story purposes that they did that than for usability purposes, and I feel like pretty quickly it opens up to the choice space being pretty wide and overwhelming. Which I guess is a segue, kind of getting into the structure of things. Is
I think it's not. I think that's even a little gradual because originally you can just control Hoagie. I think
Bernard
maybe Hoagie and Bernard. No, I think you can only control Hoagie for a while, and then you can switch.
One of the other, I forget which one, but yeah.
So I do feel like it does kind of expand that possibility space a little bit gradually.
That's true.
Not super gradually though, because as you say, like suddenly it's a million objects, and you're keeping a lot of threads in your mind. We were talking offline about that.
Yeah, I feel like maybe 20 minutes. I had both of them and could go pretty much anywhere.
Really? I bet it was longer for me, but that was another thing we talked about.
Maybe
is
half
that
hour? I don't know.
It's hard to know. It's because you might have done. There were things that I did, that I figured out more quickly because of how my brain works versus how your brain works. Like you pointed out that you worked out the thing about the kumquat tree very late, and that was like one of the very first things I did in the past, and. It was just because I immediately thought, oh, that's what he does. Like, I guess some of the things I really appreciate about adventure games and revisiting one gives me a chance to kind of to revisit that is how you pay close attention to what they say, and what your options are. And also other hints, like if you've exhausted all the options, but you talk to somebody again, there's one thing that they'll still tell you about, and usually that's a clue.
Important,
yeah, it's important in some way. Sometimes it's just you need to get me these things so that I can do whatever for you, make the battery in the past or whatever. But often it's like, I bet you didn't really cut down a cherry tree, or whatever.
Yeah, the thread that's still going.
Exactly. So it's pretty good then at being able to come back to it after a couple days and go, oh, right, okay. If I just go around and talk to everybody again, I can sort of pick up the threads where it was. Not always, but often.
Yeah, one of the notes that counter that a little bit that I'm bummed about. That's a modernization. I think that they're doing much better these days. Is the inventory items themselves? I think something like the look action. Or verb on them often doesn't give you any clue or very little clue, especially when it's in your inventory. And these days, I think there's sort of modern tropes like that are kind of just understood. It's like, okay, anything, because I'm carrying my inventory with me everywhere. And so if I'm stuck, I can always return to that and kind of get get the character to say something about it that might give me a little bit more information about what I could do with the thing, versus right now, sometimes they just say a generic term, generic phrase about, the bucket of water or something. And it doesn't give me anything. So there's some dead ends there that I wish, that they would have, gotten. But again, this is a different era and this stuff has progressed from there. Structurally, we were talking at the break just about this concept that also kind of hadn't dawned on me until I started, because when I played this originally, it wasn't deconstructing things or trying to deconstruct things. There's sort of this series of unspoken quests that are all, threads that are going. Yeah. And they're all, some of them are intertwined, some of them are parallel, some of them are crossing over, what have you. And then you have the time travel, which is kind of a brilliant, cool thing. And it's very instantaneous, which I like as well. But these threads are hard to follow. There's no log of them. You're going to forget about them easily. Like, we're going to luckily play this over the course of, week by week by week. But if I stopped playing this for a month or something, I would be, I'd be out of luck. And,
but I think that's so true of any game of this time.
For sure, of this time. Yeah. But I'm just
it's even true sometimes of more modern games. But I think it was effectively bad especially bad at the time. But even, I guess there's, the other games that are tough with that are like skill-based games, mostly Nintendo games, for example. You go and you have a skill-based game, or even an RPG. We were just playing Final Fantasy IX. If you left Final Fantasy IX for a month, you'd be lost. You'd be simply lost. There's a number of games that I have started multiple times, and every time I come back to it, I'm like, yep, I just have to restart this. I have no idea, what I would do next. Majora's Mask, classic example. I've never finished that game, and it's I wish I have, because I actually really, really like it. It's just, as it has happened, whenever I have started it, something has come up, work crisis, whatever, that takes me away from it for a while. And then I come back to it and I'm like, what am I? Yeah. All right, I'll start this again in a few years, Yeah,
agreed. That, as a side note, that might be one we should consider for the future. Rather than Ocarina, because everyone and their mothers played Ocarina. Yeah, Majora's kind of a little bit more controversial of a.
It is, and it had a good re-release. I don't know, last year, maybe 2 years ago. Yeah. For the 3DS. So yeah. Side note.
I would just, not to say that I want a quest log or something like that, but I think when you combine some of these things that that the genre at the time took for granted, because people who had played, the audience that had played the genre had grown up with it, right? And there's certain fundamentals that I think probably the designers were assuming people knew. But when you take it out of context and you play it today, again, really interested to hear from the audience if anyone's experiencing this. But you have the different threads going at the same time that may or may not cross over. You have
and in some cases you may not even be able to progress.
No, exactly,
and you won't know.
You won't know. You won't know why. But then the other side of it is the object. I don't know what the state that we'd want to, or the description I'd use, but the object state or status of an object is not always clear and consistent. Sometimes you will have used something that I'm thinking, and I may be wrong on some of these because we're not done with it yet, but that you probably don't need to use again, or you don't, you know what I mean? But it's still in your inventory, and it's going to give you some red herrings unexpectedly. And maybe that was part of their design and their choice, and then some objects you can put in the time machines and some you can't. So it's like, does that mean that one needs to go, or are you just letting me do that? So it's just all of these questions pop up, and you kind of combine those elements together, and it makes a soupy mess of
it does. It does make that very hard. I mean, I think that leads to some interesting puzzling, because it's like there are cases where you can send things through, and I'm thinking of one thing in particular, and I worked out what you had to do with it. There's an object you can send through the toilet, but you don't want to. And you want it to get to the future in a different way. And I won't say any more than that, because I don't know if you've done that puzzle yet.
I think I know which one you're talking about. Yeah. And
So it comes to some. So you're like, hey, you have to work around these weird constraints.
Yeah.
And I agree, they're not communicated well, other than just I can't do that. Like that won't fit in there. Or with the hamster, I was told never to put a living thing in the chronojohn or whatever, you know. And so it's things like that I think are getting. Yeah, for me, the bigger frustration has not been that stuff. Although I totally see your point. I did play this basically in 2, couple-hour sessions. So I was kind of in the mindset the whole time. But the thing that I found very frustrating was just how long it takes me to get around. So I'll take Hoagie and I'll be walking him around the mansion and I'll have an idea and I want to go test it out. But now I've got to go back out 5 screens, 6 screens, whatever, to get back to the porta potties. The chronojohns, and I'll get there and then I'll have to switch to somebody and it's like, oh, I'll switch to Laverne. Oh shoot, she's in a place that's far away. It's just like, and so I have to take her back to the kennel and then she's got to go through the voice line again. So like there's a lot of needless I feel like the stuff that I did in the, say, 3.5 hours to get this far in this game, was for me probably no more than an hour of actual sort of play that was new and fresh, and mostly like a ton of just retreading steps of like, oh, I should go do this now. Oh, I should go do this now. Whatever.
Well, I mean, to that point, it hadn't dawned on me in the old days playing these games, but there's a level design to this that maybe, and I actually would say some of the Telltale games do a pretty good job at this. There's mini level design going on that needs to be thoughtful, the same way that any 3-dimensional level design flow would need to be thoughtful. And that's gonna, well, and then there's other, whatever, fast travel,
right.
Other options.
Yeah, I mean,
that people
I would have loved a fast travel option for going to the chronojohns to send stuff back and forth.
Yeah.
Just to save me the step of walking. Okay, now I'll have to walk all the way back. Okay, fine. But even that, I would have just eliminated. Like, looking at it, I would have said, this is... and I wonder, like, I'd love to pick the brains of somebody who was in QA. I mean, you did some adventure games, I guess. Like, was that feedback that you ever gave back? Yeah, I mean, so I did some QA on Monkey 3
back in those days, and my vague memory of it was, unless you were on the project pretty early, which there usually weren't many testers on the project pretty early, they lay out, if we get Larry on, like for instance, he could talk us through both of the games. They lay out the games so early, and things start happening where the flow, because the structure of the game was based on the early ones, like Maniac Mansion, Monkey 1, etc., and the engine, they kind of know what they're building, and it's always going to be this sort of like, the flow chart is always going to be the same. You know what I mean? Or at least structurally. And so moving a screen around, like, it's all kind of part of the story, right? In the locations. Right. And sometimes they could squish things together. I believe in Monkey 3, one of the things that they added was, you double click on the exit and you just instantaneously load.
Yes, I missed
rather
that.
than walking across the screen. I may be wrong on that, but one of the games they started doing that, and
it was certainly in Grimm.
Yeah, and in this game, I'm trying to do it all the left and right, and it's just not, they didn't do it. They hadn't done it yet. So there's some kind of shortcuts like that, but as far as like the flow and the order of things, like,
you can like skip through dialogue if you've heard it already. Yeah. So that's a nice thing, but it feels like it sort of goes back to what we were talking about with, and it's totally different sort of question, but with controller layout, it's like make the A button or the X button on the PlayStation controller the thing you're going to do that's most important to your game. And it feels like there's a mechanical misstep here of like the thing you're going to do all the time is send stuff back and forth. Yeah. I almost said send shit back and forth in the chronojohn, so that's where my brain is. You're going to send stuff back and forth. in this mechanic, right? In these time portal things, you know, you're going to do that all the time.
Yeah. And it should have been designed that way somehow.
It should have been designed thinking, you know, let me eliminate the frustration of having to go and do that every time. You know?
Well, and the memory is, we talked a little bit, I think, before we started recording, but to kind of bring this point up of this interesting push and pull of nostalgia playing this game and kind of being transported back to both the delight of these games in the moments of discovery when you're actually, oh, I figured it out. I got this. And I solved this particular problem or puzzle, to the nostalgia of just, you know, frustration and just irritation of like, why is it this way? You know, and kind of the times when I was notorious back in the day when I was a player of these games, where I would just get so pissed off, I would drop the game and I wouldn't play it for 6 months because I was so like, oh, I'm never going back to that. And I eventually would, and I would eventually finish them once I calmed down. But it just fights you, you know. And these games, I forgot how much I use the word exploration, which may be kind of overselling it, but there's this sense of experimentation that I forgot about, you know, because you're going to fool around, especially with Tim and Dave's games, because, you know, and in Ron's games to some degree, there was some wacky stuff going on. So they were encouraging you to experiment in weird ways, and I kind of forgot about that. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, right? Except, you know, in a jigsaw puzzle, you have all the pieces in the beginning, you know, and you know they're all there, and you just got to try them and fit them together. Here, it's a jigsaw puzzle, but it's where every now and again you get a new piece. Yeah, you know, and you know, and how some of these pieces come in are often very strange, and you kind of like I don't know if you washed the carriage. No. Okay, so there's a great moment where it's like, you know, every time you wash a car, it rains. Yeah. You know, it's like the first thing that happens after you wash your car, which is why I never wash my car, ladies and gentlemen. But anyway, you know, if you wash a car, it's going to rain, right? That's the old, you know, wives' tale or something like that. Not in Seattle. It's going to do whatever. Yeah, it's going to do whatever. It's going to rain all the time anyway. You probably never wash your car either. But, you know, and so I didn't know that was where, you know, and I've kind of revealed that puzzle to you. I didn't know where that was going. But when it happened, I was like, oh, that's pretty funny. Yeah. You know? But again, that was a thing where it's like, oh, that brought in a jigsaw piece. No idea. I had no idea that was coming. You know, and so sometimes when I'm like, I'm there going, oh, I know what I need to do with this. What I do appreciate is that there are times when I'm like, oh, I'll just do this to make this happen. And then that's not there. Like, I can't do that. And I'm like, huh, okay, that logically made sense to me. I still think there's a core of the right idea on how to solve this next step of a narrative thread or a puzzle thread. And I start, you know, like, my mind starts going through the different sorts of possibilities. Okay, that doesn't work. Well, okay, I guess that makes sense why that wouldn't work. You know, I have an object I know I want to send forward through time, but in time, not with the machines. And so I'm like, huh, so I can't do that. You know, it's just like that, you know, those, you know, of kind of like, okay, that's sort of like, oh, I had two puzzle pieces, but they didn't fit together and I thought they would. But I know there's another piece there somewhere that will, you know. But the weirdness is the not knowing if you have all the puzzle pieces yet. That's the really, really strange thing. Yeah, and not even having hints that they're out there, you know, or what they are. And sometimes I guess the dialogue is what they try to use for that. But yeah, that's a good point. Yep. Let's see. There was one other thing I wanted to make sure I mentioned. A lot of film references, of course, in this movie, in this game. Yeah. You know, Star Wars, of course. But also, you know, there's a character who talks like Woody Allen. There's some Taxi Driver. There's Back to the Future. There's a Wizard of Oz reference. There's a lot of film references. So I think that just goes to, you know, Dave and Tim's particular interests, but I thought that was amusing. Mm-hmm. The other thing, too, though, is I do want to comment on not just some of the writing in it sort of being really, really funny, but also just how thematic it can be at its best. Like, in that very first room, you know, your first sort of interactive experience is already so much about time
like if we were playing this for the first time and didn't know it was going to be about time travel, there's a lot about time in that very first room or two rooms. There's a dime in the phone, and if you look at it, all it tells you is the date. It's a 1952 dime. There's, of course, the grandfather clock. There's which represents time, literally. And then there's a calendar in the office. Like there's these like lots of little hints, almost foreshadowing of like, this is a game about time, and maybe the strangeness of time or the passage of time. Like it's not, if you were coming to the first time, you had no idea what it was about, you might not know that. But there are even those little hints right away, which I really like. I mean, that's a really, and I don't even know, like I'd have to ask Tim and he might not even remember at this point, but like, was he thinking about like setting the stage and seeding the player's brain with time travel? I love things like that even more than I love the writing. And I guess that's because I've become more of a film nerd as I've gotten older. I love picking up on things like that in screenplays or whatever, or even things I read.
Well, there's definitely one of the great things I think about this game, and I think Monkey, Sam and Max, they were this way as well. I think it's what drew people to these games. There's a very consistent sense of identity and cohesion while you're playing it. Like things fit together well. Other than the design stuff we're talking about with the puzzles and kind of the user interface of things and the flow, like it's consistent. And the identity is very clear. And I'm sure the team, that everyone working on it knew what the identity was. And so when somebody who may, not every idea would come from Dave and Tim, I'm sure somebody was creating an idea and
a lot came from the scumlets. Yeah.
And they knew, because they knew what the identity was, they could add calendars all over the place, right? Because it would, because, or artists, because they knew what the themes were. And it's cool to see that's such a consistent vision for something like this.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's something that you did very well too when you were, effectively a creative director at LucasArts. I mean, you'd come up with sort of design pillars, of like what this experience is about, so that if people had a question and you weren't available to answer it immediately, they could fall back on those, And I thought that was, a helpful framework, right? To be able to say, well, it's about, if you need to make a choice about the commandos. If they're cooperative, that's better than, the player going it alone, however that might manifest. Right.
Yeah. And it's always, it's always my goal. And I'm still developing pillars today. And you never know how well they're doing. But it's super difficult thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say it's a huge challenge. It is a huge, huge challenge, because you're going to have, I mean, back then it was like 30 or 40 people or maybe 50.
That's one of the keys
for
is
our
team
games.
Size. Yeah.
Yeah. But nowadays it's a lot harder. And I think that's why the structure of development has changed so much. Certainly at places like Ubisoft, for example, where it's like, 100 people. So like, high end of a PS2 era game, work on a game for a year or 2 years or whatever, and then for 6 months, 1,200 people work on it or whatever, 1,500 people, and they just throw a ton of bodies at it because at that point it's like, we just need you to go through this list of things we need made, if you need reference, look at the other animations that were done in the first 2 years or whatever, and I think that's it's just a different. It's just a different time, from that standpoint. So, All right. Do you have anything else to talk about sort of in this sort of section that we played through?
I'm trying to skim. Nothing that I don't want to give anything away, of course. No, I think we hit the kind of core points.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take another break then, and we'll come back and talk about what we're playing next. And I don't know. We'll figure something else. Figure out something else. Okay, back in a second. welcome back from break 2. We've got a lot of stuff, surprisingly, actually, to cover. We are just after doing our Final Fantasy IX series, and we wanted to at least let people know that we did try to reach out and find guests for an interview segment. But between language barriers and sort of a little bit more, I don't know, legal correctness or just sort of, I don't know, manners or different just cultural norms as far as talking about stuff that you no longer work on or whatever, that's a lot more closed than Japan than it is here in the States. So that was, unfortunately, the sort of confluence of those made it really, really hard to get somebody on. But I did want to bring up a couple things. First of all, there was other stuff pointed out to us by a few readers. I wanted to mention in particular Daniel Johansson, Josh Arman, who mentioned tons of side quests and things that we didn't find or get to. You can get a really good sword for Steiner if you beat the game, or you get to the Lich and defeat the Lich in under 12 hours. You can get his best sword. I'm glad I did not try to do that. I don't know about you.
Oh, man. Yeah, wow.
I would probably go find somebody and stab them if I finished that in 12 hours and 10 minutes. So that is not a thing that I would want to try to do. Maybe if I played it a ton, I would feel better. But,
wait, the Lich is one of the last bosses, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you can get to that final dungeon in under 12 hours, it's basically
crazy because there's not even a New Games Plus, right? I mean, you find if you get that, then you're really just using it for the last couple bosses.
Right. I mean, you could probably go wander around the world a little bit.
I guess so. Yeah, maybe.
And there's an Ozma battle. If you on the Chocobo, there's a gravestone in the cloud area that you can fly to. And apparently, if you talk to that twice, you get a really, really hard battle that you get a really good reward for. And then there was one that enables, it's in the final dungeon. If you defeat this character, you can open up a really, really good shop for, what is that called again?
Oh, the synthesizing.
The synthesis shop. So, and apparently you can get a lot of good gear that way as well. So thanks to those folks. Somebody did ask what our party lineups were, and that's a good point because we didn't often talk about that. And I actually thought we were the same, and I learned and during the break that we were different. So who were you playing with there most of the time, Tim?
So, yeah, my core 4 were Zidane, Dagger, Vivi, and Freya, because Freya's a badass.
Freya is a badass.
Steiner's a goof.
And Steiner is a goof. But for me, I played especially the final dungeon with Steiner because I got his ultimate weapon. And I went back and looked, and I actually did get that as well on the Chocobo quest. So I get 2 ultimate weapons from the Chocobo side quest, and those made it a lot easier for me to win the game for sure. Although there were a lot of abilities that I had that were helpful. So,
well, yeah, having played with your save game, I can attest to the power that your party had going for itself.
And then one last one that actually could warrant a little bit of a discussion from John Hassan. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, John. He says, anyway, one last thing I'd like to hear your input on is something that tends to plague Final Fantasy games. You'd mentioned something similar in Garland's sudden appearance, but the final boss of the game, strangely, isn't Trance Kuja. While the boss itself is actually pretty decent fight-wise, even among the fan community, this fight is regarded poorly because of the character being a nonsense nobody character whose name you wouldn't even know without the in-game targeting menu in battle, which is a good point. that creature, character, whatever, Necron, kind of comes out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. What did you think about that? This was your first time getting to the end of a JRPG.
Yeah, I mean, it was a WTF for me, for sure. I mean, like we talked about with Garland, I feel like, I mean, I don't think I'm overstating this, but I feel like basically once Garland you really met him and he was introduced, I feel like from that point on to the end of the game, at least Critical Path, was really rushed and kind of not well well introduced. And the last boss is like the ultimate example of that, where I could see where they probably wanted to make it this godlike thing that was beyond all imagining or something, but it just kind of fell flat. Cool character design, I'd say, visually, but otherwise, it's like, it's a bummer because so many hours, go into the game, and you want that, and you start to care a little bit more about Kuja at that point, and then to have him not be the focus would definitely agree with the feedback.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I understand the thematic sense behind that character. He's a destructive force, and so much about the game is about a creative force, and in particular, creating your own life. And that has a lot to do with the orphans and all those kinds of themes, and all those genomes or whatever they're called, the other monkey people. I get that kind of final ultimate expression of the antagonist, but I agree, it's totally unmotivated. It's like, oh, and then there's this thing beyond time and space or whatever. It's like the worst Doctor Who villain. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, I get it, and I've definitely seen that in others of these games. Like, I think I mentioned at one point in the series that at one point you battle fate, fate itself. And it's things like that where you're like, it's almost operatic. It's just like really big.
That's a theme that comes up though, right? And there's opera throughout, and theater. And somebody you mentioned that, or maybe a reader mentioned that Garland was actually a boss, an ending boss in 1 or something, right?
Right. Yeah, we got that from our friend Jason Schreier at Kotaku. I think he tweeted that at us. Yeah, which I had actually played and did not remember. So that didn't come back to me. So I think that's about it from us on Final Fantasy IX. I appreciate all the emails. I have been emailing people back. We may not always get a chance to read your reader email, on the show. I hope we will get to most of it, but I do at least want to thank people. It's great to get that feedback. Yeah. We also get a couple other iTunes reviews with written reviews, and I want to thank those folks very much for those. It's great to have them. And if you have a minute, and could go in and do that would be terrific and much appreciated. Anyway, so for moving back to Day of the Tentacle, the weird thing, and something we've decided we really need to talk about more in next session, is this game is way more nonlinear than either of us remembered, which of course is because we played it one way and we just,
it's weird to think of and have that revelation where it's like, oh yeah, if you really think about the structure of it, it's not what you think of in an adventure game. And I think even more so these days that they've gotten more user friendly, but thus more linear.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's actually, I said we put Final Fantasy IX to bed, but I mean, that's kind of one of the strengths of that game in terms of its progression is that, it's a fairly linear for an RPG, but that lets you tell a particular story, in a good way. And I guess, when we'll talk about this more next week, but for me in Day of the Tentacle, there isn't really a lot of story.
No.
There's there's
situations or something.
Yeah, exactly. There's a setup of like, okay, we've split these people across time, and they need to find a way to get back together, but it's weird to make a subtle distinction between story and narrative, but I feel like, the narrative here is more about the characters and the player experience of the puzzle. The different puzzles, and I think we'll really dig into that more next time because even trying to find a walkthrough and figure out how to play 2 next, I'm looking and it's, the ones I've found were like people who have not done things that I have already done, so it's really, really hard to know like, what do I tell people to play to? So, I think we're going to just aim to play another around 3 hours, try to basically finish another third of the game or so. If you're using a walkthrough or something, you play much faster than this. But with us kind of wandering from screen to screen and trying to figure out what to do next, it took me about 3.5 hours to play this section this time. And I'm shooting for about the same for next time. And I think that will basically take us within shouting distance of the end of the game. I think this will be a three podcast playthrough, and hopefully we'll get a guest for the fourth. So, meanwhile, you had a Hitman update.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up Hitman really quick because of our second series, but yeah, I finally got a chance to do one of the elusive targets for the current new Hitman game. Which, for those of you who don't know, the elusive targets are these targets that occur within one of the episodes or the maps that you buy or download for the main game. But these elusive targets only show up for a very specific amount of time in the real world, real life time. So 48 hours, 72 hours. You have to go and play the mission during these 72 hours, and you only get one shot to get the target, and you have to get out alive if you want credit without getting a fail. And so because they're time-based, I had missed the first two and I was not around to be able to play it. So I was able to play this last one. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is I had two moments that I don't know if I've ever had in another video game, or at least not in a long time, playing this one mission. One, I won't give away too much about, what. Well, I guess you can't do it now, so there's nothing to spoil because you can't actually go back and play them. But it was in this sort of like graveyard of this church, and you're supposed to actually take it.
Which level is this?
This is in Italy.
Sapienza.
Yeah. And so I'm in the church graveyard, and you're supposed to take out this cardinal. And obviously I didn't know his path, and you have to do your own recon. And I was kind of just meandering around. I was dressed up like the groundskeeper. And he walks out this door and starts coming toward me. And I had this moment of terror and tension like I've never had before, because this elusive target that I was looking for had just was rocking right toward me. He was surrounded by guards, and I just panicked. I didn't know what I was going to do because he's there, and like, I can't mess this up because I only get one shot at it. And of course, everything went to hell. Like, it was just, I tried to duck around a bush. I took out my silenced pistol. It just went just horribly wrong. And and then when I finally lost this sense of dread that I was never going to be able to, go after him again. And you just don't have that feeling in games very often, where it's like this finality of it. So it was kind of this point of seeing him, and then this point of losing him was just a really interesting experience that I got to hand it to them for doing this. I hope they stick to their guns, because if you do get an elusive target, I assume it's pretty gratifying.
So you didn't get him?
No, I took the shot. I got him, but then they took me out. I mean, it was a mess. Like, I was the worst assassin ever. Because wow. I should have been more patient, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't. But there's a lot of pressure, because if he can only do it this once, wow.
I know.
Yeah, that's a really risky thing to try.
Well, it's very divisive. It's very, if you read people's reactions to it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting, because, for me, of course, my experience with Hitman was very much like, try this thing 1,000,000 times.
Yep.
And to have it have a, like, nope, you get one shot, to do this one thing. Oh, and by the way, you have to do it over this one weekend. Mm-hmm. Just is like, wow. That's just weird to me. It's just plain weird to me. Like, I have not actually gone back to play at all. I have been chasing other new experiences. Instead, I wanted to mention two things that I played this week. We haven't been doing a lot of what we've been playing, but these were two things that were, fairly cheap. So I thought it was worth mentioning them. But they have a time window too. So. On the PS3, I'm a PS Plus member, so I get, a couple free games a week, rather a month per system. I guess it's usually 5 or 6 games. And on the PlayStation 3 this month, there's this puzzle game, Echochrome, which I feel like was originally maybe a PSP title, but it's on the PS3 now. Yeah, I think it was. And it was one of the few games where I was like, oh man, I wish I had a PSP to play that game. It's a great sort of perspective game. They're basically, simple abstract levels. You're having this abstract character. You have to touch different points in the level. But if you alter your perspective so that things touch that aren't touching from other perspectives, you can move across them. So it's like an Escher puzzle, where it depends where the camera is, how you can navigate the level. It's very clever. It's not a long game. It probably took me, I don't know, 8 hours, 10 hours, something like that to play through. But it's fun. It's a cute little level editor too. So it's an interesting little thing to play. That was one. That's free for PlayStation Plus members. And then the other one, while I was in there, while I was waiting for that to download, I was kind of noodling about in the store, like you do. And I saw that DoTT's debut title, Remember Me, was like $6 or something like that on PlayStation 3. And I thought that was a game I was curious about when it came out. I cannot skip it for $6. So I grabbed that up. I don't know if that's a PlayStation Plus price or what, but it's only for a limited time. And that game is actually surprisingly fun. I felt like it was a little maligned when it came out in the reviews. It was a very late PS3 title. It's sort of similar to like an Uncharted or a Tomb Raider in terms of like lots of level navigation and things like that. It's very pretty. It's got some interesting mechanics. And I think that, one of those mechanics was one of the reasons why it got kind of dinged in the reviews, because it didn't use it a lot, which to me, as I mentioned to you in the break, Tim, was sort of like focusing on the wrong things in Grim Fandango to bring the audience in. Because it's sort of like a little spice in the dish and not, and not like the whole dish. It's like, oh, here's this great dish of rice and it's got a little bit of saffron in it. And they focused on, I wanted a little more saffron, so it's an interesting game. And I think it's worth taking a look at.
Yeah, I've been intrigued by that one too since it came out, and not a lot of oodles of time, but I'll definitely check it out now. Yeah, worth playing. I thought for sure. I haven't finished it yet, so I can't speak to how the story's going to play out. But I've been really enjoying it. The combat's really interesting. It's kind of a lot of sort of third person hand to hand combat with combos and stuff. But those are interesting because you can program them yourself and you can sort of change your strategy depending on what you're facing. Really kind of some fun ideas in there, and I thought it was worth taking a look at. Well, that studio did move on to make Life is Strange, which has gotten a lot of quite a bit of good press and some awards here and there. So
that's an episodic adventure game style title for sure,
with some interesting themes, which is cool.
It has I would say Remember Me also has sort of a weird. The writing's a little weird from an American perspective. It's made by a French developer. It feels like a David Cage game sometimes in that way. And I know that was a criticism of Life is Strange, that like some of the idioms that are used feel like, huh? Mm-hmm. But this one's set in a future and, sort of a cyberpunky future, sort of like Mirror's Edge or something like that. So, definitely worth checking out and cheap right now if you get right to it. You might be able to pick it up still for that low price. I'm not sure until when it goes. Anyway, that is about it for us this week. We're going to play that next 3 hours of Day of the Tentacle ish. We'll see. If I find a clear stopping point, I will definitely tweet that out from @DevGameClub, and probably also from my own account, which is @Brett_Duville, both on Twitter. And people can find you where, Tim?
@Tim Longo Jr. with a JR. Okay.
The other two important Dev Game Club addresses are devgameclub@gmail.com, all one word, and of course our website at devgameclub.com. This past week I added a what we're playing section, or sort of what's coming up
Yeah, I
next
was
for the
going to
podcast.
mention that was good addition that you put in there.
And also a page which is basically a ton of links to what we've played and sort of the show notes for each of the episodes for each of the games we've played. And I'll just continue to add to that as we finish games. So that's it for us for tonight. Thanks so much for listening, and we hope to hear from you. Hope you're enjoying the adventure game. Good night, Tim.
Good night.